Ethan sat in the small room of his apartment, staring at the screen of his old computer. His fingers hovered over the keys, but he didn't type. Instead, his eyes wandered to the window, where the colony's sky was painted with shades of orange as the sun set. It had been years since he left behind the war. He was just another man now, living a quiet life on a peaceful colony, far away from the chaos of the galaxy. But the past had a way of catching up with you, no matter how far you ran. The last thing he wanted was to be reminded of the war. It had left scars on his mind and body, and though time had healed some of them, there were still things he couldn't forget. People he couldn't forget. One person in particular, Serena. He had met Serena years ago on a battlefield. She wasn't just any alien. She was the daughter of an alien king, a warrior princess, with more strength and courage than he had ever seen, and he had saved her. It was one of the few moments in his life when he felt like he mattered, like he was part of something important. But after that day, after the war ended, they went their separate ways. Serena went back to her people, and Ethan disappeared into the quiet life he had chosen. But now, as the message flickered on his screen, Ethan couldn't believe his eyes. A signal from a distant galaxy, a distress call.
Oh.
But it wasn't just any call, it was from Serena. Help, the message read. I never forgot you, human. His heart skipped a beat. He stared at the screen in disbelief. After all these years, she was reaching out to him. But why? What had happened? Why was she in trouble? Ethan didn't know, but he couldn't ignore it. The memories of the past, of Serena and the bond they shared, came rushing back. He remembered her fierce eyes, her determination, and the way she had trusted him back then. The feeling he had when he saved her wasn't something he could easily forget. Still, Ethan hesitated. He had left that life behind. He was at peace here, living a simple life. Why would he throw it all away for someone he hadn't seen in years? And yet, the thought of leaving her stranded, of not doing something to help, gnawed at him. With a sigh, Ethan stood up and walked to the window. He glanced out at the horizon, trying to make a decision. The wind rustled the trees outside. The world was calm, too calm. He had once been part of something bigger, something dangerous. But that had been a lifetime ago. His life now was simple, was enough. But as he turned back toward his desk, he knew what he had to do. Couldn't leave her out there alone. He had to answer. He quickly typed a reply, not knowing what to expect, but feeling a sense of purpose stir within him once more. His fingers tapped the keys as he sent a message back. I'm coming. Hours later, Ethan was standing at the local transport station, his bag packed and ready. The message from Serena had been brief, but it had been clear. She was in danger, and she needed him. The transport ship would take him across the galaxy, back to where it all began. He could feel the old adrenaline rushing through his veins, something he hadn't felt in years. The galaxy was vast, and so many things had changed since he had last seen Serena. Technology had advanced, planets had fallen into chaos, and peace had become a distant dream for many. But in all of it, Serena had been one constant. He remembered the battles they fought together, the way she fought with such passion and honor. She was a warrior, one of the strongest he had ever known. And now, she needed him again. The transport ship arrived, its engines humming with power. Ethan stepped aboard and found a seat, his mind racing with questions. What had happened to Serena? Why was she reaching out to him now? Was she still the same warrior princess he remembered, or had the years changed her too? As the ship lifted off and soared into the stars, Ethan tried to calm his mind. He had made a choice. He wasn't going to run anymore. He was going to help her, no matter what it took. Hours turned into days as the ship traveled through the galaxy. Ethan passed the time by thinking back to his time with Serena. He thought about how she had looked, how strong she had been, how different from everyone else. Serena wasn't like the other aliens he had encountered during the war. She wasn't just a leader. She was a symbol of hope for her people. Ethan wondered if she still remembered him. He had never forgotten her, but did she still remember the human who had helped her? Or had he become just another face in her past, another casualty of a war that had ended long ago? The ship finally arrived at a distant planet, one Ethan had never been to before. He stepped off the ship and took a deep breath, the cool air hitting him. This place felt different, strange. The ground beneath his feet was rocky, and the sky above was a deep shade of purple. There was an energy in the air, something he couldn't quite place. As he made his way through the dense jungle-like terrain, his thoughts were interrupted by a loud noise. He turned quickly, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he hadn't used in years. But there she was, Serena. She stepped out from behind a large rock, her eyes locking onto his. Her armor was different now, more polished, but her presence was still the same, strong, commanding, and unwavering. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but full of emotion, "you came." Ethan looked at her, unsure of what to say. The years had passed, but the moment felt like no time had passed at all. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, both knowing this was the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could imagine. This part sets up. It's the emotional core of the story, bringing the characters together again. After many years, it builds suspense and excitement, while also developing the relationship between Ethan and Serena. The moment Ethan locked eyes with Serena, the world seemed to slow down. It felt like time had stopped. The years between them, the distance, and the silence, all faded in that instant. Serena had changed. Her armor was new, more advanced, and her face had the confidence of a leader. But her eyes, the eyes that had once shown fear and trust, now burned with a different intensity. She took a step forward, her tall figure casting a shadow over Ethan. "You've changed," she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. Ethan didn't know how to respond. "So have you," he muttered. "What happened? Why didn't you reach out sooner?" Serena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around, scanning the landscape as if expecting someone to jump out from behind the rocks. Ethan noticed the nervous energy in her movements, something that wasn't there before. "I needed you, Ethan," she said, finally breaking the silence. But things got complicated." Looked down at the ground as if the memories were painful to speak of. "Complicated?" Ethan repeated. He was starting to feel more than a little lost. "Serena, you're a warrior. You don't get complicated." "I'm not just a warrior anymore," she replied, her voice growing stronger. "I'm a leader now, and my people are in danger. I thought I could do this alone, but I was wrong." Ethan could see the stress in her face. She had always been strong, even when they first met. He had seen her fight, seen her protect her people with everything she had. But this was different. This wasn't a battle of strength or weapons. This was something deeper. "So what is it? What's going on?" Ethan asked. Serena hesitated, then motioned for him to follow her as she turned toward a narrow path leading deeper into the jungle. Ethan followed without a word, his curiosity growing. "My father's people, they were overthrown years ago," she began. "I was the last of my royal line. I had to flee. I thought I could rebuild, unite my people. But there's a faction, enemy faction, that's been hunting me. They want to stop me from taking back my throne. They don't care how many lives they ruin in the process." Ethan could see the pain in her eyes as she spoke. Serena wasn't just fighting for power. She was fighting for her people, for their future. This was about survival, not glory. "How can I help?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the growing weight in his chest. He had known the war once. He had been part of the chaos, part of the reason everything had fallen apart. But now, he was standing beside Serena again, ready to fight for something that wasn't just survival. It was about hope. "I need your strength, Ethan," Serena said, her gaze softening. "Need someone who understands how to fight when everything is stacked against you. Someone who knows what it's like to lose everything." "That's a lot to ask," Ethan said, feeling the weight of her words. He had been in her position before, had lost everything, but he had chosen to walk away. Yet here she was, asking for his help, asking him to come back into a world he thought he had left behind. "Please," she said, turning to face him. "I've already lost too many people. I can't lose this battle too. You owe me nothing, but I'm asking you to help me save everything. For both of us." Ethan stood there for a moment, feeling the silence. Around them, the wind had picked up, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. Everything was calm, but beneath that calm, He could feel the tension, the threat that loomed over them both. Serena was right. She couldn't do this alone. And neither could he. "All right," Ethan said finally, his voice firm. "I'll help. But you better tell me everything. I'm not walking into this blindly." Serena nodded, her face a mix of relief and determination. "Thank you, Ethan. I'll explain everything, I promise." They continued walking through the dense jungle, the path narrow and uneven, making it difficult to keep a steady pace. As they moved forward, Serena spoke more about the enemy faction. "They're not just a group of rebels," she explained. "They've gathered forces from different worlds' mercenaries, exiled warriors, criminals. They'll stop at nothing to keep control. I've been on the run for so long, and every time I think I've outrun them, they find me again. But now they've sent word. They know where I am. They're coming." Ethan could feel the weight of her words. These weren't just enemies. They were a threat that could destroy everything Serena had worked for, everything she had sacrificed for. "And you think we can stop them?" Ethan asked. Serena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she paused and looked out across the horizon, as if seeing something he couldn't. Then she turned to him, a quiet confidence in her eyes. "I have to believe we can. If we don't, my people won't survive, and neither will I." Ethan understood then. This wasn't just about saving a princess. It was about saving a people, a way of life that had been lost in the wake of war. It was about doing what was right, even if the odds seemed impossible. "Right?" Ethan said again, this time with more resolve in his voice. "We'll fight them." Together, Serena gave him a small smile, the first real smile he had seen from her since their reunion. It was a brief moment of peace, but it felt like a promise on, unspoken agreement that they were in this together, no matter what came next. As they continued their journey through the jungle, the sounds of distant birds and rustling leaves filled the air. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But there was no one. Only the jungle, quiet and still. It was a moment of calm before the storm, and Ethan knew that the real fight was just beginning. The jungle around Ethan and Serena seemed endless, the thick trees towering above them, casting shadows across the ground. The air was thick with humidity, the sound of distant creatures humming in the background. Despite the peace of the jungle, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He kept his hand close to the weapon strapped to his side, his instincts telling him to stay alert. He wasn't sure if it was the remnants of the old soldier in him, or just the sheer weight of the mission ahead. They had been walking for hours, with only the occasional break to drink water and keep their strength up. Serena had been quiet for the most part, focused on the path ahead. Ethan couldn't blame her. He had seen the way she carried herself, strong, determined, but with an underlying sense of weariness. She was fighting not just for herself, but for her people, and the toll of that responsibility was starting to show. "You mentioned before that there's an enemy faction after you," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "What exactly are they planning? What's their endgame?" Serena slowed her pace slightly, glancing at him over her shoulder. Her expression darkened. "They want control of my people," she explained. "The faction that overthrew my father's rule wants to seize power for themselves. They believe the only way to keep control is to eliminate me. They want to erase everything my family built." Ethan nodded, understanding more now. She wasn't just trying to take back a throne, she was fighting to restore a way of life that had been taken from her people. It was about more than power. It was about honor, heritage, and justice. "We can't let that happen," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We're not fight this alone, and we're not going to let them erase your family's legacy." Serena's eyes met his, a hint of relief flashing. In her gaze, she had been carrying this burden alone for so long. Hearing Ethan's words gave her a moment of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She had always known Ethan was different, but hearing him speak like that so confident, it was like a weight had been lifted. "You don't know how much that means," Serena said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "But you have to understand. It's not just about me anymore. My people are counting on me to lead them. If I fail—" She paused, her words hanging in the air, heavy with the weight of responsibility. "You won't fail," Ethan interrupted, his voice steady. "We'll make sure of that." They continued walking, but this time, the silence felt different. There was an unspoken understanding between them. They were in this together, and no matter the challenges ahead, they would face them side by side as they moved deeper into the jungle. The sun began to set, casting an orange glow across the sky. Serena stopped suddenly, her hand raised as a signal for Ethan to do the same. He froze, his senses alert. Something wasn't right. Serena's eyes scanned the area, her posture tense. "We're being followed," she whispered. Ethan's hand instinctively went to his weapon, but Serena stopped. "Him." "Not yet," she said, her voice low, but calm. "We wait." Ethan didn't like the idea of just waiting, but he trusted Serena. She had survived so much, and if she thought they needed to be patient, then he would follow her lead. They crouched behind a large boulder, waiting for whatever or whoever was following them to reveal themselves. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The jungle was quiet now, the usual sounds of distant animals gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Then, out of nowhere, a group of figures appeared from the shadows. They were tall and clad in dark armor, their movements calculated and precise. The way they moved made it clear they weren't just random travelers. They were soldiers, and they were closing in on Serena and Ethan. "They found us," Serena muttered under her breath. "I was hoping we could avoid them a little longer." Ethan's grip tightened on his weapon, but he stayed still, waiting for the right moment. The soldiers were too close now, and there was no more time for hesitation. Serena turned to him, her face set in determination. "Follow my lead," she said. "We fight our way out." Before Ethan could respond, Serena was already moving, sliding out from behind the boulder with the fluid grace of a trained warrior. She rushed toward the soldiers, her blade flashing as she struck with precision. The first soldier went down before Ethan could even get a clear shot. Ethan followed suit, drawing his weapon and taking aim. The first soldier he targeted fell, and with that, all hell broke loose. The jungle erupted into chaos as the soldiers fought back, but Serena and Ethan were too fast, too well prepared. Serena's combat skills were unparalleled, her moves a blur as she took down one opponent after another. Ethan was right there beside her, covering her back and taking out anyone who got too close. It wasn't a long fight, but it was intense. By the time the last soldier was taken down, Ethan's heart was pounding in his chest, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He looked over at Serena, who was breathing heavily but otherwise unscathed. She was a force to be reckoned with, and watching her in action only confirmed how much she had grown since their first meeting. "That was too close," Ethan said, his voice still shaking from the fight. Serena gave a small, wry smile. "It always is. Oh, we made it through. That's what matters." Ethan nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. As Serena checked the fallen soldiers for any useful information, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what else awaited them. The faction, after Serena, was relentless. They would stop at nothing to see her fall. But one thing was clear. Ethan wasn't going to let that happen. He had made his choice. He was with Serena now, and together they would fight to the end. As the jungle slowly returned to its quiet state, Serena stood up and turned to him. "We need to keep moving. The others won't be far behind." Ethan nodded, his resolve strengthening. "Let's go." They didn't speak much after that, but they didn't need to. There was a bond between them now, a shared understanding that no matter the danger, they would face it together in this part. The story continues to build tension, showcasing the strength and teamwork between Ethan and Serena. It highlights their growing bond and sets up the challenges ahead, while keeping the pace exciting and engaging. The jungle had started to thin out, the dense trees giving way to a rocky terrain. Ethan and Serena had been walking for hours, but neither of them seemed tired. Every so often Serena would pause, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon, always on the lookout for any sign of trouble. Ethan stayed close behind her, his senses alert, with the weight of the weapon on his side a constant reminder that danger was never far. Ethan had always been good in combat, but now, with Serena by his side, it felt different. She moved with a quiet, controlled power, a warrior's grace that Ethan could only admire. He had known she was skilled, but seeing her in action, facing their enemies without hesitation, made him realize how much she had grown. She wasn't just the princess he had once helped. She was a leader, a force to be reckoned with. "How much farther?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Serena didn't answer immediately, her eyes still fixed on the distance. "Not much," she replied, her voice steady. "We're almost there. We should be close to the hidden base." Ethan nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. We're still processing the battle they had just fought. The soldiers they had faced weren't just ordinary mercenaries. They were highly trained, with advanced armor and weapons. It was clear that whoever was hunting Serena wasn't taking any chances. "We're being hunted," Ethan said, his tone grim. "Those soldiers, they weren't just random patrols. They were part of a larger force, and they'll keep coming." Serena turned to him, her face serious. "I know. They've been tracking me for months. They won't stop until they find me, and they'll do whatever it takes to destroy everything. I've worked for—" Ethan didn't respond, but he knew exactly what she meant. The fight they were about to face wasn't just about saving Serena. It was about saving her people. The enemy wasn't just a group of rebels. They were an organized, ruthless force that would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. They walked for another hour in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The quiet was only broken by the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant call of an unknown creature. Then, as they rounded a sharp bend in the rocky path, Serena stopped again, her sharp eyes narrowing. Ethan followed her gaze, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. A shadow moved across the rocks ahead, and Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Couldn't see clearly, but he knew someone was out there. "Stay low," Serena whispered. "We're not alone." They crouched behind a large boulder, their eyes trained on the figure moving through the rocks. The shadow was moving slowly, carefully, as if trying not to make a sound. Serena's eyes flicked toward Ethan, a silent message passing between them. They both knew what was happening. They were being followed again. Ethan's grip on his weapon tightened as the figure drew closer. He could make out the outline of a person, tall and slender, moving with the quiet precision of someone who knew how to survive in hostile environments. The figure stopped for a moment, and Ethan held his breath, waiting for any sign of aggression. "Who are they?" Ethan whispered. Serena shook her head. "I don't know," she muttered. "But they're not with the faction. They're too careful." The figure moved closer, and Ethan could feel his heart racing. This was too close. If this person was a threat, they couldn't afford to wait any longer. Suddenly, the figure turned, and Serena's breath caught. The person was wearing the same kind of armor as the soldiers they had fought earlier. But there was something different about them. The armor was more worn, more personal, like it had been used in real battles. And the person's face, when they turned just slightly, was familiar. Ethan's eyes widened. "That's one of your people, isn't it?" Serena nodded slowly. "It's her, Amara." Ethan looked at her, confused. "Your ally." Serena's expression darkened. "No. Amara was once one of my closest friends. We fought together during the war. But when my father's kingdom fell, she chose a different path. She betrayed us." Ethan watched as Amara continued to move silently, unaware of their presence. Serena's eyes were filled with a mix of anger and sadness. Ethan could see the weight of the past in her gaze. "Do you want to confront her?" Ethan asked softly. Serena hesitated, her eyes still locked on Amara. "Not yet. We need to know what she's doing here. She's working for the enemy. We can't trust her. But if she's alone, ... maybe we can convince her to join us again." They waited for what felt like hours as Amara moved further along the path. Serena's grip on her weapon tightened, but she didn't make a move. She was waiting for the right moment. Finally, Amara disappeared around a bend in the rocks. A figure lost to the distance. Serena let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "We have to follow her," Serena said. "If she's here alone, we need to find out what she's planning. But we can't make a move until we're sure." Ethan nodded. "I agree." They followed at a safe distance, keeping to the shadows. The jungle was growing thinner as they climbed higher, the rocky terrain turning more treacherous. Ethan could feel the tension building. If Amara was truly a threat, they needed to be ready. If she was still on their side, they had to know if she could be trusted. It wasn't long before they reached a small clearing. Serena and Ethan stopped, peeking out from behind the rocks. Amara was standing at the edge of the clearing, speaking to someone Ethan couldn't see. He strained his ears, trying to catch the words. "She's reporting to someone," Serena whispered, her voice tight with frustration. "She's still working." With the enemy, Ethan's heart sank. He had hoped for a different outcome, but it seemed like the betrayal was deeper than he had feared. "Do we confront her now?" Ethan asked. Serena thought for a moment. "No. We need to get to the base first. If we expose her now, it could ruin everything. We'll deal with her later." Ethan nodded. They had no choice. The danger was too great, and they couldn't afford any distractions. Together, they moved back into the shadows, preparing for what was to come. The journey ahead was going to be harder than they had imagined, but they were ready. They had to be. In this part, tension builds as Ethan and Serena encounter an old ally turned potential enemy, Amara. This sets the stage for future conflicts and deepens the mystery surrounding their enemies, all while keeping the pace fast and the stakes high. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a deep blue shadow over the land. The once peaceful jungle now seemed darker, more dangerous. Serena and Ethan had made their way through the rocky terrain, their feet steady but quick as they followed. Amara's tracks. The betrayal stung, but Serena had no time for emotions. She had to stay focused. Every step took them closer to the hidden base, and with it, the answers they needed. They had learned everything they could about the enemy faction in the last few days. They were powerful, well-organized, and ruthless. But Serena couldn't afford to back down. She had her people to think about. They needed her. Ethan had pledged his support, and for the first time in a long while, Serena felt like she had hope. "I can't believe she's working with them," Serena muttered as they moved forward. The weight of betrayal still hanging heavily on her shoulders, Ethan kept his eyes on the path ahead. "People change, Serena. Don't always get to choose who we become." She glanced at him, a small knot of understanding passing between them. Ethan had been through his own battles, his own losses. He understood better than anyone that things weren't always black and white. As they neared the base, the sounds of movement grew louder. The base wasn't much, just a few scattered buildings and hidden entrances in the side of a cliff. Serena motioned for Ethan to stay behind her. They were close now. The enemy soldiers would be all around them. They crouched down behind some large rocks, waiting for the right moment. Serena's heart raced. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The moment she would take back what was hers. Lose everything. "You ready?" Ethan whispered, his hand on his weapon, his voice steady but quiet. Serena nodded. Ready. The plan was simple. They would infiltrate the base, find the leader of the faction, and take him down. Serena had been told that the leader was the one who had orchestrated the fall of her kingdom. If they could defeat him, the rest of the faction would lose their strength. But getting to him wouldn't be easy. They had to fight their way through the guards, and even then, there was no guarantee of success. Ethan gave her a small smile, one that showed his trust in her. It was all Serena needed to feel a surge of confidence. Had been through so much together already. Nothing would stop them now. The two of them moved quickly, crossing the open space toward the base's entrance. The shadows around them grew thicker as they approached the doors, and Serena held her breath, listening for any sign of movement. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. They had no time to waste. They slipped through the entrance, avoiding the guards who patrolled the outer area. Inside, the base was cold. The walls made of metal and stone. It was a place built for war, not peace. Serena felt a rush of determination. This was her kingdom, her homeland. She would take it back. The deeper they went into the base, the more tension hung in the air. Serena's senses were on high alert. Every corner, every shadow could hide an enemy. She had fought in battles before, but this felt different. There was a sense of finality in the air, a sense that everything would be decided here. Tonight, Ethan was right behind her. His presence a constant reminder that they weren't alone in this fight. They had each other, and together, they were stronger than they had been apart. Finally, they reached the heart of the base, the command center. The door was guarded by 2 soldiers, their weapons ready. Serena motioned to Ethan, and they moved in silence, taking the guards down quickly and quietly. They didn't need any unnecessary attention. Inside, command center was filled with monitors and control panels, all connected to the faction's forces across the galaxy. At the far end of the room stood the leader, the one who had betrayed Serena's family. His back was turned to them as he stared at a large map on the wall. "Well, well," the leader said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I thought you might come eventually. But I didn't expect the human to be part of the package." Serena's hands tightened into fists, her anger rising. "You betrayed my people," she said, her voice steady but filled with rage. "You took everything from us." The leader turned slowly, his eyes dark and cold. "Your people are weak, Serena. They've always been weak. You were just a tool, a means to an end. You were never meant to lead." Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm. "It's not over yet. You're going to pay for what you've done." The leader smiled, stepping away from the map. "We'll see about that." In an instant, the room was filled with gunfire. The leader had activated his own personal defense system, a network of automated weapons that surrounded the room. Serena and Ethan dove for cover, sound of blaster fire ringing in their ears. Ethan returned fire, his shots hitting their targets with precision. Serena was quick, too. She moved like a blur, taking down the soldiers one by one. The leader had underestimated them, thinking his defenses would be enough to stop them. But Serena and Ethan were determined. They were unstoppable. After what felt like an eternity, the last of the soldiers fell. The command center was silent, save for the sound of their heavy breathing. The leader, now cornered, sneered at them. "You think you've won? You're just one more casualty in a war you'll never understand?" Serena stepped forward, her eyes locked on his. "I understand more than you think. I understand that it's not over until I say it is." With a swift motion, she disarmed him, her blade at his throat. The leader looked at her, his face twisted in defeat. He knew he had lost. "Reign is over," Serena said. "And now we take back what's ours." The battle was over. The enemy leader was defeated, and Serena had reclaimed what was taken from her. But there was still much work to be done. The base had fallen, but the fight for peace had only just begun. Serena looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it." Ethan gave her a smile, one that spoke volumes. "We did it together." In this part, the tension builds to its climax as Serena and Ethan face the enemy leader in the heart of the base. The fight is fierce, but ultimately, they succeed in defeating the leader and reclaiming what's rightfully hers. This chapter sets the stage for the next steps in their journey, showing how far they've come and how strong their bond has become. The sun rose slowly, casting its warm golden light over the quiet jungle. The battles of the previous day seemed distant now, as if they had happened in another life. Ethan stood at the edge of the base, watching the morning light break through the trees. It had been a long and exhausting journey, but it was far from over. The enemy had been defeated, but the real work was just beginning. Behind him, Serena was speaking with the remaining members of her people, those who had survived the chaos and were now beginning to rebuild. Ethan could hear the low hum of voices. As they made plans for the future, there was hope in the air, a feeling that had been absent for far too long. Serena approached him, her expression calm but thoughtful. She had changed, and so had he. The battle had forced them to face things they couldn't ignore. It had tested their strength, but more importantly, it had reminded them of the bond they shared. It was a bond forged in battle, but it was also one of trust and understanding. "We've done it," Serena said, her voice soft but steady. "The base is ours, and we've defeated the enemy, but we still have so much to do." Ethan nodded, turning to face her. "You're right, the hard part's over, but the real work starts now. Rebuilding, making sure your people have what they need." Serena smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I never thought it would be like this. I thought I could just return, take back my throne, and everything would fall into place. It's not that simple. So much has been lost. I have to rebuild not just a kingdom, but a future. Ethan could see the weight of her words, the burden of her responsibility. But he also saw the fire in her eyes, the determination that had driven her all along. She wasn't just fighting for a crown. She was fighting for a future for her people, for herself, and for the hope of something better. "You don't have to do it alone," Ethan said, stepping closer. "We'll do this together. I'm not going anywhere." Serena looked at him, her eyes softening. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm not alone anymore." Settling between them, they had fought together, trusted each other, and now they had come out the other side stronger. The past was behind them, but the future was uncertain. Still, there was a hope that they would rebuild, not just a kingdom, but a better world for everyone. "We need to gather the leaders," Serena said, her voice taking on a more determined tone. "We can't move forward without their support. They need to understand that the war is over, that it's time for peace." Ethan nodded. "You're right. It's time to unite. No more fighting, just rebuilding." They spent the rest of the day meeting with the leaders of the different factions, working together to build a plan for the future. It wasn't easy. Old wounds were still fresh, and trust had to be earned. But Serena's presence, her strength and determination, helped to calm the tensions. One by one, the leaders agreed to work together for the good of all their people. The sounds of distant chatter and the crackle of campfires filled the air. For the first time in a long time, it felt like things were falling into place. Serena and Ethan sat by the fire, the warmth from the flames offering some comfort against the cool night air. "You did it," Ethan said, his voice quiet but filled with pride. "You brought everyone together." Serena shook her head, her expression thoughtful. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've been by my side through everything. You're the unique reason I'm here," Ethan smiled. But there was something more in his eyes, a deeper understanding of what they had been through. They had both changed. They had both grown. Together, they had overcome the impossible. "I just did what anyone would have done," Ethan said modestly. "But I'm glad I was here with you. You've got the strength to lead them. See it in you." Serena looked at him, her gaze intense. "I didn't always believe that, but you were right. I had to believe in myself, and in the people who stand with me." Ethan reached out, placing a hand on hers. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. They had both been through so much, and yet here they were, stronger than before. "I believe in you, Serena," Ethan said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "And I'll be here, no matter." What comes next? For the first time since they had met, Serena smiled genuinely. It was a smile that carried both relief and hope, a smile that told Ethan everything he needed to know. Together, they had faced the darkness, and now they could look toward the light. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were ready. They were ready to rebuild, to forge a new path, to create a future where peace wasn't just a dream, but a reality. As the fire crackled between them, Serena and Ethan sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The past was behind them, and the future was full of possibilities. They had a new beginning, a beginning they would build together, step by step. In this part, the focus shifts to rebuilding after the battle, emphasizing the growth and trust between Ethan and Serena. It brings a sense of closure to the immediate conflict while setting the stage for the future, where peace and unity are the central goals. The emotional journey of both characters is highlighted, showing their evolution from warriors to partners.